I've got a series of a kind of orientation slides and short videos that sort of give you a virtual tour that we're going to use to share context of what the Albany Carousel is. Jack is the lead carver, obviously, and is our presenter tonight. This is a picture of the building. When you think about the animals and the mechanism, it's got to be housed. And the Jansen Beach Carousel is an example. And the Dells has to build a building. They got to get the land and raise the money and erect the structure, and then they got to put the mechanism in it and rehab all those things. But that's the Albany Carousel right downtown. It's extraordinarily charming. This is a 30-second clip of hello, technology. Each one of those is hand carved, and the mechanism by itself is pretty amazing. This is the carving studio. This is like a 1-minute walkthrough. Just kind of pay attention to some of the details. That model that Jack created in the early stages, the finished and in process animals that are done. Those examples or leaves that are used for part of the carving process. Wood stash. That's the carving studio in the basement, lower level. There's a painting studio upstairs, about another half-a-minute walk through. It's where all the painting finishing work gets done. Those big metal doors at the back will come into play a little bit later. There's a museum in the basement that's got antique animals. This is just one segment of it, which is amazing to look at the old things. They also have a gift shop, and these two examples of hobby horse heads are part of carvings that are done to support the project. You notice the price tag of $200 on it. Those are carved by carvers and painted in the paint shop and provide an important source of income for them. This is a picture from the Salem Carousel exhibit that I want to use because it shows the hollow inside of the animals that reduce the weight. And so that's a piece of the construction process that's by and large hidden to the outside world. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to spotlight Jack. And so he'll get to fill the screen up. And Jack and I have gone through a series of questions, so he knows what they are, and they're questions he's been asked for the last 23 years. So there's no trick question. But if you have a question, he's permitted to say, I don't know, or I don't remember. That's okay. So Jack, why don't you start by telling us how you got to be lead carver? Kind of what is your life story that sort of gave you the credentials to take on this role?
Um, I my dad carved like a chain out of I think it was just out of a piece of 2x4 or whatever. It wasn't really very good wood, but it was pretty crude. But I just remember that when I was a kid, I tried carving a little bit. But we didn't have a lot of money, so I didn't have decent tools, or so I just used a knife, and back then I didn't even know how to sharpen it very well. So, but I think it stuck in my mind later on. I started getting more serious in my 30s about carving. I worked at an aircraft place in San Diego, and I made wind tunnel models out of wood, um, and kind of different things. They were mostly scale model or whatever. And then I kind of started working with wood and carving it and, filing it down, that kind of stuff. So, and it was pretty accurate. I mean, it was, they needed to be within a few thousandths of an inch, tolerance. And then when I moved to Oregon, I started working at Lynn Benton Community College, and I was working at night. I ended up working in the IT department. And So I worked at night, and then I would take art classes during the day and took a lot of drawing, learning how to shade and all that stuff. And so it helped me visualize the three-dimensional part of it. And then while I was working there, one of the managers knew I carved, and she was friends with Wendy, who was the founder of our Carousel. And she came to me and said, well, Wendy's looking for a carver, or looking for carvers. And so then I met with her, but I didn't know she was looking for a lead carver. I didn't even know what a lead carver was, but so um, but anyway, I met with her and she told me. So I said yes, but I had really no clue what I was getting into. After 23 years, I wouldn't have thought I'd still be doing this, but but I am. So it's just a fun community project to be involved with, and you make a lot of friends, and it's, we're kind of like a family because everybody knows each other, and so it's just a fun place to be.
Yeah, I assume as lead carver, you carve, but there's probably have other things on your plate as well. What's the nature of the job?
Um, I I don't do a whole lot of administrative stuff. We, as a nonprofit organization, we have you your name's in a computer, and so when you sign in and sign out, we track all the volunteer hours for grant purposes, and so that's kind of taken care of. So I don't really do a whole lot of paperwork. I, yeah, actually, I don't do any at all. But I spend most of my time just every carver that comes in, I train them, because if I didn't, then I wouldn't know what their experience level is. 80% of our carvers never carved before or even took art classes other than maybe high school. So I've had people try to train them. One, they didn't like doing that. And so then I ended up having to kind of go back to it. But it lets me understand where they're at with their skill level. Um, I'll fast forward a little bit. Each one of our animals has or 7 or 8 different pieces. So there's 4 or 5 different carvers that work on it at different times because of their experience level. So I assign them what I want them to work on, knowing what their skill level is. And then somebody else will take over later. So I try to tell everybody to leave their ego outside when they come in so they don't get possessive about an animal. And it's working because the carvers don't really, they know that somebody else will have to take over later just because they don't know what it is that they need to do. Um, I I do carve, but there's certain times of the week where I don't carve at all because we have 15 carvers there that I'm kind of going from one to the other to explain what they need to do. I have slower times that I can spend carving, and I also bring things home to work on because I don't have the time there to do it. And because we don't, there's maybe 3 experienced carvers that can finish an animal. The rest of them are just kind of do the in-between things. It's not a criticism of anybody. It's just the way we need to work it. So,
Yeah. Would you guess how many carvers have gone through in 23 years?
and no, I have a hard time telling you. I mean, even now, I think we probably have 25 to 30 carvers, but it could be 35. I never really count them
No.
very much. I mean, that some of the Wednesdays, I'm there at 9 o'clock in the morning until 9 o'clock at night because we have carvers that come in that have jobs that come in after 5 o'clock. And so those carvers never even see the carvers that are come in during the day because they just don't come in at the same time. So so I don't really know for sure. I'm assuming we probably had maybe 100. I don't know. That's kind of a wild guess, but when we first started, I think at times we probably had 30 carvers in at the same time. Saturdays were our busiest times. John could probably say the same thing. Tom as well. I mean, there was times where we were really, really busy, like on a Saturday. But since COVID, it's kind of backed off that.
Yeah. So you've been at this for 23 years, is that right?
Right.
Yeah. And how many animals have you carved that are all the operational on the carousel? How many more do you have to carve to say you're full?
Well, there's the carousel holds 51 right now. There's 45 on there. So we have those 6, but then we've got 7 holiday animals. So there's 3 Christmas, 2 4th of July. Those will go on during the holidays, and then we have 2 replacement for each row. So when we need to repair an animal, so we have 19 more to go. I'm hoping to get 4 or 5 done a year. So then we can be done in 5 to 7 years. I'm kind of hoping that we can get them done all of them done before I die. So
Does done mean that's the end of the project and no more carving is ever needed, or what happens after those 19-ish get done?
Well, you mentioned that we're going to be doing right now. We don't carve a whole lot of things to sell in the gift shop because I need them to carve on the animals. But I have 2 or 3 carvers that will make some in between the other carousel animal stuff that we're doing. I made a proposal to our executive board about trying to sell rocking horses to the people that, trying to get somebody to buy a carousel animal and put it in their living room is too expensive for one thing, and they take up a lot of room. So and I think a rocking horse would be more affordable for them to buy, a grandparent could buy one for their kids or whatever. We do need to speed up the process, though. Right now, it takes a year to paint one of our carousel animals just because we're using oil paints. So we're talking about using acrylics for doing the rocking horses. And they could even be a rocking dog or something. If somebody had their favorite dog and they take a picture of it, we could carve their dog and be for their kids so they could be. I don't. We need to kind of start thinking about it soon because we don't want to finish all the animals and then really not know what we're doing. So we want to kind of get started doing that. I carved a rocking horse before our carousel started. And it's the same principle as doing a carousel animal. It's just the 7 8 different pieces carved separately, and then they're glued together.
Mm.
And that's mostly because the grain of the wood needs to be a certain way.
Yeah. Can you switch gears a little bit and talk about the process, the cycle of developing an animal? I mean, from the beginning, the launch is when this actually gets mounted on the carousel. There's a big celebration. I
Right.
assume that's sort of the end game. How many steps are there in between, and what does that process look like?
Um, the animals are all sponsored by someone, and most of them are families around town. There's a family in California that sponsored one, but most of them are from around here. Um, they the outside row animals to sponsor was $10,000. The middle row was 7,500, and the inside was 5,000. And then there's a bunch of other smaller things that somebody could sponsor, for like $1,500. But once a sponsor came in and said, "I want to sponsor an animal," then they figure out which row they want, and then we had a person that would schedule a meeting with myself and the lead painter and sponsor another lady, and then we would talk about what animal. And I was there mostly just to make sure that they weren't asking for something that wasn't going to be structurally strong enough to withstand being ridden all the time. Um, they would have a meeting. The artist would sketch it out, and then bring it back to the sponsor and show it to them. And if there was changes, they'd make those. If not, then they would sign off on it. And at that point, they would pay some money. I'm not sure exactly what it was. And then there would be, then I'd get an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper colorized, and then I would blow it up to the size that it needed to be. The outside row animals were bigger than the other two rows. They were all different sizes. So the outside row animals only 12 inches thick. The middle row is 11 and the inside's 10. So I had to know which row it was going to go on so I could laminate the wood according to that. At one time we had Salem Wood Products was laminating our animals together. So I would make cardboard patterns of the animals, where the legs would attach, the head and the neck and tail. And then I would give those patterns to the Salem Wood Products, and they were trained by Salem on how to laminate these. And then they would do it in between their other jobs. So sometimes it might be a year before I would get the animal back from them. Right now we have a woodworker that's got a planer and everything, and so he's doing all, and that's Tom. Not Tom, Ron. It's Ron that's doing that. So he's doing that now, so it makes it much quicker to do that. And then we would get the wood back, and then I'd have to drill the hole for the pole to go through, and then we would start doweling and attaching the legs temporarily so we could take them on and off, and then carve them separately, put them on there and test it. And then when it was like 70% done, we'd start gluing everything together. And then the fastest one we did took 2 years to carve. That was done by Pete. But most of them took between 5 and 12 years to carve because we're volunteers. And it just took, and it just, because of the speed that you carve, I mean, some carvers were there 2 hours a week, some were there 10. So it's just, it just wasn't a fast process. It was an irritation to the board at first, but now that we're up and running, we have a big party when the animal's done, and so it draws a crowd of people in to be able to ride the next animal type thing, which is, we didn't know at the time that was going to happen, but that sort of came about later.
Is 12 the extreme? Is there 5 to 7 average, or do you have a sense of what might be
Yeah,
average?
it's, yeah, I mean, we still have animals that were sponsored in 2008 in there, but sometimes they would sit for a while. I would assign somebody to do something on it, but then they could only take it to a certain level and I would switch them to something else. So it might sit a year until I had another carver that could get back to it. Sometimes Wendy would come to me and say, this sponsor is complaining that their animal's not being worked on or something. And so she'd say, could you start working on this? And I say, well, if I do, then it's going to slow down on this other other animal. So I had to jump around a lot at first. It doesn't happen quite so much anymore, but
No pressure.
yeah.
No pressure. How do the studios operate? And I guess the question of you, did you always have a studio? How did you do the early, what, how did you do the work to carve and paint before you had the building and the current studios?
Well, we were in 5 different places over the 15 years or the first one was we were in a little store in downtown Albany, but we outgrew that within a year. I mean, it was in along some other stores and it didn't even have a bathroom. We had to go down a little dark hallway to a bathroom that was behind some other stores. But we outgrew that really fast. And then we moved to another place that was a 100-year-old building and it was brick. And it had an upstairs and a so the paint area, they were in the kind of the back room behind that. The first building, none of the painting really happened, but when we moved to the other one, the painters had a little room, or not, it was a pretty big room, but the painting was back there, and then the carvers were upstairs and also in the front part of the building. Um, and then we moved into the building that was on the spot that we're on now, but it was a really old building, not very good, but we were in there 7 or 8 years or something. I don't remember the time, but and then when we got the money to build the building, then we moved to Two Rivers Market, which is a small market, and then we were there for a year while they built the building, and we weren't very productive there because we just of being cramped and stuff. Um, the I'm not sure if did that answer the question about that.
Yeah, yeah. But when you get to do the actual carving, you have the 7 or 8 pieces. You have a head, neck, or combination, and a body, a tail, and 4 legs, and maybe some accessory dogs or cats that are tacked on to the body. But how do you what do you tackle first? Or does it matter?
Well, it most of the time it things changed over the years, but only because I learned. I mean, my job didn't come with a manual, so I really had no clue what I was doing. I sort of had to figure things out as I went, and I know some things I didn't do right, or I should have done it a different way, but it helped me learn. But most of the time it was I I knew back then that we had carvers that had more experience that could do the detail work. So I would, you know, legs were pretty simple for someone to do. So somebody didn't have a lot of experience, I'd have them carve a leg and then kind of do the rounding and look at anatomy pictures and figure out where the knee joint and ankle joint was and start making the hoof so then it could help them visualize a 3-dimensional thing. That was my biggest goal, was to hopefully help them understand looking at pictures and what they needed to do. And then and a lot of times that would take them quite a long time. And I know I was self-taught as a carver, so I know that when you first start carving, you just take little tiny bits, cuts, because you're afraid of taking too much off, even though I tell them you have enough wood, but it's just the way you do things, because there's other carvers around and you don't want to screw up while they're watching or something. I don't know. I mean, it's just human nature. It's not a criticism of anybody. But they, after they're a while, then they start taking bigger cuts and carving faster as they go. So I would always, and everybody that came in the carve would want to carve on something that was going on the carousel. So I tried to make that happen. Um, and then I would just kind of switch into something a little bit more difficult as they went along. So I not only do I have like 100 pieces of carousel animals laying around, I have to remember who's working on what so that I can, and what their skill level is. So, but it keeps my mind active, I guess. So
Do you have do you have a paper system to track that? Or
no,
just
it's mostly
all in your
just
head? All in
right.
your head? God
So
help us.
it's my head's getting pretty full, so I know that
Yeah,
that's why I forget things.
yeah.
No,
Yeah.
it's just I've been doing it for 23 years, so it's just kind of, if I tried to explain to somebody else, they would, they'd kind of go crazy, but I understand. So
So we know that the outside of the animal is the show side. It's got more detail. The inside is plainer, which I
right,
assume is lower risk for carving, so that if
right,
they kind of make an anatomical boo-boo, it's not quite so noticeable as kind of having cross-sighted eyes on a horse.
right.
Yeah. Who does the finish work? The final details and the critical, is that you and
Yeah,
a
mostly
whole group of people?
Pete and I, and maybe one other carver, we get them when they're like 70% done. It's could be 80, but it's depends on who was working on it before, but they're still in pieces. So as carvers, if everybody was going to carve a leg, if you had 4 different people carving legs, they would all look different from each other. Not horribly different, but so when you go to put them on an animal, you have to blend each leg to the body, and so that the muscles kind of match. And so that's what I end up doing, is doing the muscle definition and making sure the legs are the same diameter. Um, and I measure them or look at them and kind of say, this one's too fat, I need to take it down, or the knee joint's not quite in the right place. So then I'll make those changes and blend it into the body, and then I'll start doing the muscle definition in the shoulders or the hip type thing. And Pete does the same thing. And most of our carvers don't. Um, if you leave little carving marks on the saddle or whatever, they will show when they paint. So I'm really adamant about the sanding, and most of the carvers can't see those defects very well. So then, I could keep going back and saying, hey, there's but it's easier for me to just take it over and sand it so that it gets it smooth. The only thing I'm adamant about is that I want them to look realistic, and um, and and I forgot the other one. Oh, and that it needs to be round. There's nothing in nature that's has a flat surface of, plants or animals, humans. It's always a curved surface. And so that's from the time they come in and learn, I'd say there should be no flat surfaces. And so that's the only thing I'm really adamant about is those things.
Yeah. You also have to make sure they're structurally sound. Is that right? So that
Right.
there's a piece of the design process that says fragile parts that are going to get kicked off will get kicked off, or those kind of things. That's, do you deal with most of those in design? Or
Yeah,
later on?
I mean, when I look at the pictures, at first I never really looked at that when I first started this, but later on I did. I really make sure that I talked to Ron and Pete about how we need to laminate something together so that it's not going to get broken off. Um, the and so far we've been pretty lucky. I mean, we had a leg break off, but it was because some lady got off an animal and lost her balance and fell sideways and hit her head on the animal next to her. It snapped the leg off and it cut her head really bad and blood everywhere, and we had to call the paramedics. So it's um but that's really the only major problem we've had.
Okay. Well, let me give you a break here in talking. I'm going to switch gears. Steve Botkin asked what wood you're using, and it's basswood primarily, with sometimes some other wood for strength. Is that the
Right, we put some I can't think of the
hickory maybe?
yeah, hickory. Yeah, we put hickory in the middle of the tail of a couple of the animals where the tail went straight up, so when people swing their leg to get on, they would kick it. So we would put hickory and we would laminate in the middle of it.
Yeah, and Patrick, will come back to your tools question. I'm going to play Ron Tatum. I shot a video, and I made some clips of him talking about the fabrication process. Let me play those. Let me see if I can quickly.
We will turn a piece over to a.
Hang on just a minute. There we go.
I'm Ron. I have carved here about 5 years, and I started as a woodworker. That's my background is just cabinetry, that type of stuff. Straight, narrow, or straight, plumb, square. That I didn't know anything about curves, and I started here, and I went, oh, this is kind of fun. So they realized that I can do the woodworking. So I do a lot of the laminating, a lot of the cutting out of pieces, helping Jack design structurally how the animals are going to work. Not only for keeping the material lightweight, keep the animals as lightweight as we can, but also structurally sound so that when people crawl all over them for years, they maintain their integrity.
It's all basswood?
All basswood.
And where do you source it?
Every once in a while, we will throw in a piece of, one of the animals has a hickory tail. And it was just because it was a tail that really extended out, and we needed that strength. Basswood probably would have worked, but we decided that, or this was before I got here, they put a hickory tail in.
Will you make that decision? Or Jack,
No,
or someone
that
else?
would be between myself and Jack. I'm Ron. We will turn a piece over to a carver, and he kind of takes it to his skill level, maybe roughing it out. We give it to another carver, the more advanced. They can put in some muscle definition, some feathers, or take it to the next carver who's more advanced, and it just kind of goes down the line to where it's at the end, it's to the lead carver, and he does all of the final details.
And the body, the whole animal, once glued, is heavy, but how much would the body typically weigh? And is that a struggle for you to manage?
We can take 2 or 3 people and move bodies around fairly easily.
The full
body,
animal.
yeah.
What about just the body before the legs and tail and head?
That can be heavy. Yeah. I've struggled at my shop without a second hand to do it. Our animals probably weigh between 125 to 175, 80 complete. Maybe 200.
It's a lot of weight.
So a lot of weight. It definitely is. We will turn a piece over to a carver and.
Hang on a minute. So you're given a design. Some artist somewhere will have drawn this do they have a good sense about structural weaknesses, or do you have to sort of like critique?
I don't think
That-
the artist takes that into consideration.
Hang on, sorry. So you're given a design. Some artist somewhere will have drawn this. Do they have a good sense about structural weaknesses, or do you have to sort of like critique?
I don't think
That-
the artist takes that into consideration. Jack and I, when we're laying out how to laminate up an animal, we will actually physically and we've got the drawings here, life-size drawings of our animals. We will sketch out how I'm going to laminate it, and the legs at the joints of the elbows, I always cross laminate. So I've got grain going one way, grain going the other way, and sometimes I'll do a double layer, so it's like that. And then, so the grain direction is always with the strength of the direction we want it. And then we may put a couple of dowels through that joint just for strength.
So that takes a lot of engineering
It does.
minds, right? In terms of,
We can, Jack and I can spend hours and hours thinking this up and trying to think through so that we don't get down the road and go, oh, that's not going to work.
yeah.
You know, so we try to eliminate gotchas. We don't always, but we try to plan ahead.
Okay, I'm going to pause that there. As I recall, when I interviewed Ron, he said a lot of the wood is 2-inch thick by 8-inch or so wide and long, and those are sort of the building blocks. Is that pretty accurate, Jack?
Correct,
So
yeah.
the kind of, so you're making a lot of glue, a lot of planing to get those things mated and
Right.
joined up. Is that right? Yeah. And you're gluing these up as separate pieces. The head, neck is one assembly, and the body is all glued up separately from.
Right. When we make a pattern, if you were to go back to look at the pictures on the wall, there's pencil lines that you see on the drawings that I made to show where the legs and the neck and head and everything was attached, and then we'll lay we'll get a piece of cardboard and cut that design out. One, we want some of the lines are made so that we don't waste a lot of wood when we make the blocks. And so then we'll just kind of make the cardboard pattern, and then then when Ron sketches it out, he'll make it the grain the right way, and then he'll lay the cardboard pattern on there, and then he just cut it out to that shape. The the head is a kind of a little bit different story, because we sometimes the head's turned, the picture shows it being turned, and so that means the nose isn't quite long enough, because I've made some mistakes starting off. The head was turned, and we cut the piece of wood out like that, but then when you straighten the head out, the nose was too short, so I had to kind of deal with stuff like that. But that was just a learning thing that I needed to deal with.
Yeah. We switch gears a little bit, talk about tools. People buy their own tools, bring them in? Do you provide them? Do you sharpen them? What are they, long handled, mallets? What does it look like?
When most of the carvers now have their own tools, but when we get carvers, I mean, we get so many visitors in there that, when they come in, if they want to try carving, we have tools. We bought enough of their the flex cut tools that they're like 4 in a set. We bought a number of those, and then when they come in, they can borrow our tools to see if they like it. Carving tools are expensive, so I wouldn't want somebody to buy tools and then find out they hate it or it doesn't work. And so this way it allows them to try it. And I don't know what percentage it is. I mean, there's, a lot of them they'll come in for a couple months and then you never see them again. But that's okay. I mean, you don't know if you can do it unless you try it. It takes biggest thing is it takes patience. It's not, even if you never carved before, if you've got patience, you can probably make it work. There's all kinds of different carving. It's not just carousel animals. There's other things that somebody could do that's not quite so complicated, but anyway, they can borrow our tools, and then if they decide they like it, then they can buy that set. The flex cut we'll use even when we start doing the detail stuff, so it's not tools that you would buy and then never use them again. And then when they progress to doing something bigger, then they can borrow my tool or whatever to see what tools they like. I don't really like somebody buying a 20-piece set of carving tools. You end up using 2 or 3, and then the rest of them you hardly ever use. So I would rather they try tools to see what they like, and then they can go buy them, especially now. I mean, wood carving tools are really, really expensive compared to what they used to be. One tool can be $50, $60 or whatever. So we bought a box of flex cut with a really wide blade. So when somebody wants to start rounding a leg or something, that they can just borrow those from the carousel and not go buy big tools for themselves, because they wouldn't use them very often. So so we have a couple sets of those, so they can kind of buy the other ones. I don't really like the carving. I personally don't like the carving tools that's got the really long metal blade thing, because I like to use the other ones where I can actually hand carve with them. I can't think of the name of the tool, but people just need to buy what they're comfortable with. So
So in a big operation like this, you got to sharpen. Do people sharpen their own? Do you sharpen as a service? There are a few people that know how to sharpen and do the work for everybody.
we run, and then I have another carver that's really good at sharpening, but we have a sharpening machine that's on, the leather is on a wheel. The problem with that is it sharpens them quickly, but you can also screw them up really quick. So we ended up making some leather strops, and um, one of our carvers is really good at explaining how to sharpen or whatever. And so we started getting, he gave some lessons to some of the carvers that their tools were really dull and stuff. And so now they're kind of using those more than the sharpening machine.
Yeah.
It doesn't, basswood is so soft, you don't have to sharpen that often, that and it just takes a few swipes when you on a strop to get it sharp. So
Are most of the tools, are they mallet ready tools? Or they palm tools, the smaller ones you're pushing by hand?
the beginning carvers just have the hand tools, the palm tools. And then they can just start progressing once they start getting to working on head of one of a horse or whatever. The palm tools are just doesn't take enough wood off, so they kind of get the other tools. So
Yeah.
How much? Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to, the corollary question is, when you want to make progress, does anybody use power tools? Are they allowed? Do you use power tools in the shop, just at home? How does a power tool, rotary tools or grinders fit into the equation?
Well, in the carousel, we don't, we'd have too much dust and noise in there to do that. But Pete and I have started taking things home, and I use a 4-inch grinder, and I'll round off the body or whatever, because it's just, otherwise it would take months for somebody to do that. We just, I need to kind of speed it up a little bit. Even though we advertise it's all hand carved, we still need to do some of that. So I don't, Pete and I are probably the only two that I would let do the power carving, or Ron can do some of that. He can rounding, but I don't want to. Power carving, you can mess it up really fast too. So you take more wood off than you need if you're not comfortable. So it's more about just rounding the corners off and getting the piece of wood round instead of the rest of it is kind of a little bit more of a detailed.
Yeah. There's a question unrelated to tools, but has to do with the age. As I recall the story, the mechanism was it was an antique 100-year-old mechanism. Is that
Right, yeah, it's 19,
And that was
1909.
restored. That was restored. There's a lot of metal. It was a whole team of people that put that together. But you started from scratch. There were no animals that came with it.
Right,
You built everything from scratch, from the first animal. Is that
right.
That's right.
We only have one picture of the mechanism, and it was in Point Pleasant, New Jersey, 1909 till the mid-60s. And we have one picture, but it's like a postcard, and you can't even tell what animals are on there. So we don't even have a clue. We even contacted them back there to see if somebody had pictures, but so far nobody's shown up with any. So we don't even know what animals were on it.
Yeah. So you mentioned Wendy's name. Wendy was the leader of this whole operation. So that
Right.
the mechanism was a big project. The building was a big project. I assume all the relationships and fundraising was a big piece of that, and the carving and painting are a big piece of that. And then there's a whole other operation for running the gift shop with volunteers, staffing, operating the carousel with volunteers, and those kind of things. So it's a huge multi-dimensional operation. For carvers, there's a question that can somebody come in for a week and carve? Steve asked that. Steve lives in, I'm sure he's not asking about himself flying from St. Louis to Albany and spending a week in God's country to carve, but maybe he had that in mind. He needs a vacation, he said. But is that, you used an example with me about someone from Los Angeles coming up and spending extended time. Is that
Right,
viable?
he came up a couple times a year, spent a couple weeks. And he did carve some stuff down when he was in Los Angeles, but I knew what he could do, so I trusted with what he was doing. It wasn't an animal, but it was some flowers that went on the organ that we have was had a bunch of things put on it that we carved. So he did some flowers that went on there, and so he. But yeah, I mean, I'm okay with doing that if I know what somebody can do and if they're interested in taking some of the small things. I mean, even if somebody wanted to carve stuff for sell in the gift shop, that's fine. I mean, we're on the inside of the carousel, there's mirror panels, and so we're doing when somebody sponsored one of those mirrors, they got to choose a bird that goes on the. So we're doing 18 different birds that go around there. So and I've if somebody wanted to try carving a bird, I'm fine with that. I just we have to situate them realistically, like hanging on a branch or whatever. Say we have to carve a branch. So the bird is standing on it. I did a robin and a nuthatch that goes on there, and so we situate those branches so that they kind of come in front of the mirror. So when you look in the mirror, you can see the backside of the bird. So there's that kind of thing. If somebody wanted to do that, there's a choice of a number of birds. I mean, there's other things. I would just have to talk to individuals about what they might want to try. I mean, I want people to carve what interests them and not just force something on them that they don't really care about. Otherwise, if you did that, then they wouldn't have as much fun doing it. So, I try to give them as much fun as they can to do that.
So that's viable to come and carve for a while. You would check them out, vet them, talk to them ahead of time, and they could work, right?
Right. I mean, even like I said, even a bird, if somebody never carved a bird and they want to try one, it doesn't waste a whole lot of wood for them to do it. And I've had some of our carvers carve a bird, but they couldn't take it to the final. They couldn't finish it just because of, doing the small details. I'd be sitting there next to them for 2 hours saying, okay, after you carve here, you need to carve there, that kind of stuff. So it's easier for me to just tweak it a little bit when they're done, and then that kind of stuff. So
Yeah. You mentioned birds. There's also jesters. There are other accessories, the roses, the
Right.
thing go around the organ. Is that is that a significant amount of work compared to the animals? I mean, is it a 10% problem or 50% of the overall activity? How much effort goes into the non-animal carving?
Yeah, quite a bit, I guess. They don't, they're not as big, so they don't take as long, but a lot of carvers don't deal with small things very well, especially the beginning carvers, because they have they're using little tiny details, and um, the muscle control that you need to do that. It's like being a dentist, when they're scraping your teeth or whatever. It's just little tiny movements, and it's something that I think you kind of learn over time.
Yeah.
So I end up having to tweak that, and then we're using glass eyes for all our animals and also the jester head. So then there's only 3 or 4 people that can put the eyes in there, because you don't want one eye higher than the other type thing. So we try to get those, and then you're trying to make the eyelid, and so it just even though I slowly train other people to do that, it's just takes some time to do that.
Yeah, let me dive down that just for a little bit. This is a question about how many non-wood things are on an animal. So you have glass eyes, your jewels sometimes. Is there any interior metals, metal parts, metal rods, metal screws? And what about stirrups and things that have to sort of be added as part of the process?
We don't use any metal at all. When we're kind of working on the animals, we'll have screws in there holding them on there just so we can kind of see. But as soon as we glue them together, and we use Titebond 3, by the way, we will pull the screws out and then just fill the holes after that, because a lot of those you can't clamp anything. We sometimes will strap it to hold it while the glue's drying, but a lot of times we just have to put a number of screws in there to hold it on there, and then till the glue dries, and we pull those out. So we don't use any metal. We have real reindeer antlers, and then and we have the deer antlers are non-wood, but other than that, there's no other metal that's on there.
Okay, what about leather, saddles or anything using leather anywhere?
No, we never really, we never even talked about that. It's just, yeah, we just, never wanted to do that, I guess.
Okay.
We talked
And what
about using real horsehair, but we didn't want to do that. Those kind of hair gets pulled out of the tail or whatever, and we didn't really want to do that.
And what about stirrups and bridles?
We talked about that when we started the carousel. Someone, and I don't know whether it's true, someone said that once you start using, the stirrups or like a seat belt type thing, then you can't go back or whatever. Stirrups would bang up against the animal and kind of put nicks in it, and it would just cause more repair. So we never really even talked about doing that.
Okay. You mentioned to me using filler for gaps and flaws. You mentioned
Right.
an automotive, two-part automotive filler. Could you
Right.
describe how often that's needed and how it's used?
Well, if you look at old carousel animals, you can always see that line where it was glued. I know it's been 100 year or whatever, but you can always see the line where the leg was separate from the body. We try to avoid that. When we glue the leg on, we'll V out like a 1/4 of an inch wide gap where that joint is, and then we'll sand it and then kind of round the corners, and then we'll fill that with putty. So then over time, as the contraction and expansion happens, that line won't be as visible because it's a wider gap. Because the legs, the grain of the wood of the leg is different from the body, and so they're gonna expand and contract differently, and so that's partly why that line will show.
Interesting. So it's consciously leaving a bigger gap for expansion, as opposed to having a
Right.
tight fit and then filling a micro hair kind of a line.
Right, and the auto body putty is flexible, so it can give a little bit when it, it's like, when you're fender, you're going down the road and your car is vibrating from hitting bumps or whatever. So it's kind of the same thing. We've used 2 or 3 different wood putties. I don't, it's really hard on the carving tools. You have to sharpen a lot, and I don't know that it ruins the tools, but you have to sharpen a lot. So we end up just having some old tools laying around. We'll just use those to cut through that, so we're not ruining our good tools. The fiberglass or the putty we use it's got fiberglass fibers in it. So if we need to fill a bigger hole, it's better for structure than kind of regular auto body putty. The other stuff, it might break out, earlier than, the stuff we're using now.
Do you remember the name? What is it?
It's called Fiberall. It's like $60 a gallon or whatever. I mean, we don't go through it a lot, but I also use it sometimes if somebody carves too much off, I'll fill it in a little bit and so I can build it up. But most of it is just to kind of fill the gaps where the glue joints are.
Yeah. Okay. Would you just, Bill, we'll switch into painting next in just a moment, but are there any characteristics of carvers that are ideal and those that are not ideal? I mean, what do you look for both from a skill level and a human side, in terms of personality or communications or whatever kind of thing? Any filters you apply?
Well, I don't know that I look at personality so much as I mean, I can tell probably within 30 minutes whether somebody is going to be, we got a grant to do a high school, teaching high school kids. So like 1 day a week for 6 weeks, they come in and they can, they have to be 14. They can come in and carve. And at the end of the 6 weeks, if they come every time, then they can keep the tools. But probably 3/4 of them, they're in a really big hurry to get it done, and they're just sort of kind of butchering it. They're not keeping, I mean, you don't have to really keep it smooth, but they're just intent on taking as much wood off as they can as soon as they can, and that's really not going to work very well. It doesn't mean that they never would carve, but I mean, it's just kind of sends up a little bit of a flag for me. To me, if somebody took drawing classes and understood the 3-dimensional part, that's more important to me than somebody that's used the carving tools, because the tools are easy compared to going from 2-dimensional to 3-dimensional. So if somebody said, oh, I took a lot of art classes, but I never worked with wood, then I know that they can understand the carving. I've got 2 young ladies that, they're in their 30s. They took a lot of art classes, but they never carved before, and they picked up carving really quickly because they can visualize the 3-dimensional part of it.
Yeah. Tom Nicholson, I'm gonna just put you on the spot, but I'll give you an opportunity as opposed to putting you on the spot. And John Culver the same way, because you two guys kind of did a lot here. Do you have any, Tom, you said you learned carving, I think, early on by working on the carousel. Could you just,
Yeah,
could you be
I
willing
learned-
to
I learned
share
from-
your experience?
I learned from Jack, basically. Jack and Pete and several of the other really good carvers that were there. So yeah, I showed up in 2005, and Jack gave me a block of wood and said, carve a rosette. And he evidently liked my rosette because he then gave me the legs of the zebra. That's how I started, was working on the legs of the zebra. And yeah, that's how I learned to carve. And then we were living in Corvallis at that time, and after 9 months we moved to California, back down to California. And so then in 2006, well, my wife and I had sponsored an animal. We sponsored Zulu, which is the serval, and it was ready to start carving in 2006. And Jack let me do the carving on that. So I did a lot of the carving. They did the finished carving, but I spent 1,070 hours over 5 years carving on that, making trips to Oregon about once every other month I had meetings up there, so I'd spend a time carving.
Isn't that
And,
special? Wow.
That was all hand carving. Unfortunately, I learned later that my carving was giving me tendonitis, and so I don't do hand carving anymore. I only carve with power, and I carve hardwoods. So I haven't carved basswood in a long time. I carve hardwoods now.
Yeah, great.
But what I learned the basics. They're carving with all of the good carvers that were there, and learned a lot from Jack. Learned how to do the muscles, and nothing slat. And yeah, and then once I came to California, I joined the Central Coast Woodcarvers, and then I started scaling down and learned how to carve smaller things. And so that's what I carve now, birds and fish primarily.
Yeah, thanks. John Culver, or could I put you on the spot? I was
Sure.
there with John. John just noticed the horses in his background. So one of those came, I think the one on the left came to a gathering of the guilds 2 years ago. What was your work there, John?
Yeah, I belong to the McKinsey Wood Carvers here in Springfield, Oregon, and one of the carvers said, I will do a half-size carousel animal class. And half a dozen of us, or 8 maybe, signed up for it. And the military horse right behind me was the first carousel type thing that I had done. I started out just doing birds, small songbirds and that type of thing. And so we did this class, and somebody said, why don't you go up to Carousel, Albany, and carve as a group? So between 3 and 6 of us came up at different times. There was 3 of us that did most of the work, and we worked on a alpaca and a lion and a tiger. And when we started there, it was in the building site where the existing carousel is. I think it was an old warehouse and chicken factory or something like that. And on Saturdays, which is when we would come up, there would be 20 carvers there, and everybody would bring food, and you'd kind of have a buffet at lunch and pick what you wanted. And there was a lot of camaraderie, and carvers at different skill levels, so you could learn from other people and watch how they did something. I learned a lot. I ended up pretty proficient with mallet tools even after I left the carousel, and but that's where I learned how to use them. And we had one of our carvers was an artist, and she really had good perception, 3D perception, and she was like what we called our head carver, because she just had the artistic touch. And I think a head is really important on an animal. It's one of the things that people look at. And we did those animals over a period of years. It takes a while to do them, as Jack was saying. Wendy, there's Wendy, who was I don't know, kind of the backbone of the whole place, the impetus to get it going. And they set up a board to help oversee it, fundraising. And Jack was the lead carver, and we had a woman that was the lead painter. I can't remember her name right now, but she oversaw that. And there was an artist that, when, like Jack was talking, when you get somebody that wants to sponsor an animal, and they say, well, I'd like to have whatever. I'll use the example of what we did. It was an alpaca, and the family had alpacas on their farm, and one of them was named Taffy, and so they called their animal Taffy. And we could actually go out to their farm and look at it and take pictures. And what's the bottom of an alpaca's hoof look like? We didn't have any idea. So we were able to go out there and look at that in real life. And so we carved their, I wouldn't call it a pet, because they weren't in the pet business. They were in the alpaca business.
Yeah.
But it was theirs. And I think they paid $10,000 to sponsor that animal. So they would sit down with Jack and whoever, and the artist would paint a picture. Eventually, they'd start out with drawings and then paint a picture full size, whatever they wanted to do. And then we would use that as a pattern to carve the animals with. And Jack, and I'm not sure who all, but they would, from that drawing, painting, they would line out all the pieces. They'd get cut out, and so like on the alpaca there was a tail, 4 legs, body, neck, and the head.
And John, how long did you work on the alpaca?
I don't know. I'm going to say 2 to 3 years.
Multiple years. Huh?
Yeah, and there was 3 of us doing it.
Yeah.
So like I did the legs and the neck and the tail, and then I worked some on the body, but most of the other stuff. One of the guys worked mostly on the body, and then our woman artist, she did mostly the head.
Okay. Well, John, I'm going to pause you. I'm going to see if there's anybody else here. Is anybody else carved on either any carousel animal on Albany or any other outside of Oregon projects at all? Anybody want to? I discovered a guy named, I think his name is Jerry Reinhardt, wrote a book, illustrations on how to carve miniature carousel horses. And I got one of those started because I don't have room to put even a half size animal, but I'm looking forward to getting on with that one. It was part of the Carousel National Organization that would carve one a year. They would make 1,000 and cast and sell them as a fundraiser to raise money to fund rehabilitation of carousels around the country. I thought that was a pretty innovative way to do that. I want to switch into carving. John, I'm going to just I guess not pause you, but stop you. I apologize because there's a lot of interesting stories here. We have some video of the painting thing, which is the other side of that equation. And I really want to show them, and there's way more video than we'll be able to look at. I'll post those someday and you have links to them if you want to look at it. There's about a 20-minute interview with Pete Slenning that was mentioned several times here as one of the principal agents here. He does both finishing and carving. We have about 3 minutes of him talking about the clear coating process and protecting this stuff. Well, let me take a moment and get geared up for the painting one. So you're given a design. Just give me a moment. Some artist somewhere will have. So there we go. This is Terry Wiley.
Most everything is done in oils here. However, we do have a few things that we do in acrylics. We do paint ornaments for our gift shop. All of the tables that are in our cafe are done in acrylic. We have some signs that I just painted over here. They're done in acrylic. Anything that won't get the wear and tear, like the animals, can be done in acrylic. Most everything is done in
Sure.
Everything is brushed.
And do you have a brand of paint that you like?
We use Gamblin, and it is a Portland-based company, and their paints dry a little bit faster than other paints, and so we have gone to using strictly Gamblin paints.
Can you talk about the primer? And let's walk over and take a look at the horse that's primed now, or the
Okay,
animal that's being primed.
okay.
You said as background, you said you put 3 coats on this particular one?
Yes, we do. We usually put a primer coat on, and the painter, or in the carvers, after we get the primer coat on, then they can see better where there are flaws. You know, like maybe there's a hole that they didn't see. Because I mean, when you're looking at a grain as a carver, you don't necessarily see the flaws. But then if you get a nice coat of primer on it, then they tend to pop out.
Okay.
So
So again, back, you said they do the first primer coat or you do the?
we do the first primer coat, and it stays down at the shop.
Oh, it stays down
Usually
there.
we'll go down there and prime it for them, and then they do whatever they need to do.
Okay.
And then they send it upstairs.
And then how do you do both sides? You wait for it to dry?
Well, it all depends. Some animals, like this is Lady Sophia, our poodle, and because she has, you know, such an underneath to get to, we decided that it would be easier to paint her just by flipping her. So we flip her over, paint one side, sand that side, turn her over, and then do the other way. Because if you're having these animals standing up, you're laying on the floor trying to do this.
Yeah. So it's a fast drying primer? Or
Yes, actually it is. We just primed her on Monday, and you know, she's dry to touch. We will start the sanding process on her next Monday.
and what is the product you use?
For
The
our
primer.
primer, we use Kills Original. It's
Okay.
an oil-based primer, but we have found that that is the best primer to
So
use.
that's big box. I mean, that's standard.
Yeah, we get
You
it at
buy it anywhere. So
yeah.
it's oil-based primer, mildew resistant, those kind of
right,
things, right?
but we always get the brand name. We always get Kills Original.
Always get kills.
Yep.
Okay.
I mean, there are other stores that carry what they call the same primer, but unless it says Kills Original on it, we don't use
do
it.
Interesting. And you just have to sand between coats?
So we do sand between coats. All of our paints are put on with a brush no wider than about 1 inch. And then we have a brush that we call a stipple brush, which is like a stenciling brush.
It's like a short hairs.
Yep, and it's a
Stiff brush.
Yep, stiff bristles. So once we put the paint on or primer, we put it on with the paintbrush, and then we come back and we stipple it, because stippling will cause bubbles. And then when those bubbles pop, they dry flat. So we do that with all of our coats.
And then you sand on
And then
top
we
of that?
sand it, and then we usually get a total of about 3 coats of primer on. Everything is sanded in between.
And are you sanding into the crevices in between like this?
Yes, we have little teeny tools that we use to sand in those. So you're doing an animal like Lady Sophia, she's got a lot of grooves. So it takes a long time to get all the sanding done.
How long will it take you to sand? In between coats?
I would say probably 12 hours. Just
So
one
several
side.
days, so volunteer time.
Yeah.
Okay. There's a segment here in the back of the shop, there's a rack, and there's all the other things that are being painted by this shop is, I think, interesting to see. The garage door on the back of this photo is where if the animals will eventually be carted out, and Pete Slenning will talk about what happens after the paint dries, and then they put the clear. After it's primed, you then do a final sanding coat?
Then we sand,
So
and
you
then
third coat stippled and then sanded.
and then sand, and then we put on a coat. Our very next coat would be primer and the paint mixed half and half.
Kind of a base coat of,
Right. And then, so that works your adhesion. You know, you get the adhesion with the primer, and then you're preparing it to receive oil paint too. So that's how that works.
wow.
And then we sand it again. And each time we sand it, it requires less and less sanding. So then that would be the 4th coat, so 3 primer, and then the half and half coat. And then we would do, our next coat is full color. And then again, we sand, and then we put on another coat. And that is also sanded after it's done. But generally, by the time you reach that 6th coat, not much sanding required. And then we start the shading and highlighting.
And long dry times in between each
It
color
can
of
be.
paint, right?
Usually we go 2 weeks in between coats. The primer, we only have to wait about a week in between. But once we go to the oil paints, then we go 2 weeks for sure. And depending on the color we're using, we might have to go longer than that. Like in Lady Sophia, we're going to be using red on her saddle blanket. Red is one of those colors that can take a month to dry. So it could slow down our process tremendously on her blanket.
Can we just take a look at your rack and the littler things that you have
Okay.
coming through? And this is really the question of background information for people getting started and might want to work on a project on a bigger animal, and what do they do?
Up here, we have a couple of our hobby horse animals. These also take a long time to paint, and we try and use the same procedure on everything we do. Everything gets the 3 coats of primer, the 3 coats of paint, shading and highlighting. So, so that way the process is ingrained in your head.
So then you keep track of this process, for example. So this is the person that did that work.
Yes,
Is that right?
this is something that we've implemented recently, and we call it a travel sheet. And so when the carver starts carving a piece, they fill out one of these sheets downstairs. So it has their name on it, when they started it, when they finished it, And so then we know when it came upstairs, and then we have our painter sign when they started painting it, and when they finish it.
Wow. And what are the squirrel cages for?
Those are just something one of the carvers had made, and he just thought they might be kind of fun for the gift shop. So it's kind of like one of those projects that if we get to it, we get to it.
And what are all the cubicles for?
These are just painters have their stuff stashed in them so that they can let it dry. And
Are they personal projects or?
they're
for their-
all Carousel projects.
All Carousel projects.
Yep.
Are some figures more popular than others? In the sense of what people want to buy? Looks like the number of
Yeah.
hobby horse heads kind of thing.
We do have a trouble keeping the hobby horse heads in stock because they sell very quickly.
Huh.
This piece here is a nest for a couple of ducks. There's one duck up on the top shelf there. Don't know where the other one is, but those will go on the carousel on the mirrors.
Wow. So you will paint the ducks, obviously.
One of our painters is painting ducks, yes. And the hummingbirds on that little stand there, those are going to be going on one of the mirror panels also. And
So
then,
this is a jester dog, huh?
yep, that's a jester dog. And eventually, once he gets clear coated, he'll be going up on the carousel.
Do the painters have a specific picture and paint scheme in mind so that the paint? I'm going to stop that there. I'm going to switch gears to Pete Slenning, who's always looking to talk.
My name's Pete Slenning. I had a body shop here in Albany for a number of years and joined the program here for the Carousel. That's 22 years ago, 2003, and we had. I was asked to be involved with the paint system as well as being involved with the carving. So I've primarily done mostly carving, and then stayed in touch with the painters over the system that we use, and then I clear coat the animals when they're done. Yeah. And then I've helped out with the carving in the basement. Was primarily what I was here for. So. Yeah.
Can you briefly describe your clear coating process once all the painting is done, just so we can look at the end game of that?
Yeah, like I said, I'll stay in communication with the painters. I'm always coming in and nosing around to see what stage they're at, because the time element is really critical, and they have trouble sometimes when I'm talking to the painters. They'll have a certain color that's slower drying and stuff, so I'll adjust the curing time before I actually take it over. Then when the animal is finally cured, 3 to 4 months after the last brush stroke, then I take it over in my shop, and we as a group will take it over. And then I go through the clearing process rapidly. It's ready at that point for me to go ahead, and I'll do completely blow down, and of course dust and chips from inside the body of the animal. You have to make sure you're completely blown down, tacked down, and with tack claws, and then use an adhesion promoter. It's just a clear adhesion promoter. Tight bond is what I use, but that increases the link with the paint system that they have, and along with my clear. So I'm using an automotive grade. It is acrylic urethane. A lot of folks will misjudge it and misexplain it that it's a clear lacquer coating. It's not. Lacquer becomes very brittle with age. And the idea with the automotive clear coat is it withstands expansion and contraction better than a lot of the older paint systems. It's very fast dry. So after 24 to 48 hours, when I'm, well, first, when I clear coat, I go through a series of 3 to 4 coats of clearing. So when you're clearing an animal, you can only get the clear applied to the extremities and the roundness of the animal. You have to keep moving your pattern, and you always want to go from like a front to the rear of the animal, top to bottom, so that you maintain a wet area. So when I'm clear coating an animal, I will start at the head and every angle. So you have to flash between the ears. You've got to, if you have a pole like this or a unicorn horn, you've got to make sure that you flash all the way around all the different directions, and you don't want to over apply or you're just going to run it off. So
You're spraying. This is a spray process.
Yes,
But
it's
you're
an
holding a
automotive
big-
spraying gun.
You're holding a big hose with a source of.
I use an Iwata. It's an HBLP, which is the same gun that I used to paint cars with.
So high velocity, low pressure. Okay. So there's more that could be going on there, but my memory, Jack, this is the memory. It seemed like about 9 coats altogether. Between three primer coats, a mix half and half gives you 4 to begin with, and then there's several layers of paint, and then finally 3 layers of clear coat.
Right.
Then finally, it's ready for the rest of for a 1,000-year usage with no maintenance. Right?
Hope so.
How long do they last before you have to take them off and do something, do you think?
Well, we've been up and running for 7 years, I think. Pete has gone around and done some repairs on the, redid some of the paint areas because some of them get chipped easily, just the way they were designed. So he would go use his automotive paint to, the colors to, if the saddle is blue or something and it's chipped up, he'll just get some blue paint. It may not match perfectly, but it looks better than the white or the wood showing through or whatever. So he'll just put some paint on it and he'll just kind of do that. So he'll do that on the worst spots or whatever. We haven't taken any animals off yet. Once we get all of them on there and we get some replacement animals done, then we'll start taking them off and to do some of the repairs. The repairing part is a totally different. I wouldn't even want to get into it because it's kind of because of the clear coat you can't just strip the whole animal off and paint it again. You have to, if the saddle's all dinged up, then you just sand the saddle down to a certain point, and then that gives Pete an area where he can mask off just underneath the saddle and just put the clear coat on the saddle instead of, you have to have a kind of a line somewhere where you can put a piece of tape on there so you can't tell the difference between the old and the new type thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. We're going to be running into bewitching hour pretty soon. I want everybody to think about any questions that you might want to ask as we get toward the end. But Jack, is there anything that I missed in terms of you would like to communicate about the project, about any dimension, technical or non-technical, about
I think one of your questions, your first questions, was you said something about using if we did wood burning. We do some wood burning. The birds, I do wood burning, and also Pete does too. And then I'm kind of showed some other carvers how to use the wood burner, and so they've done it. But like, the mouse, there was a mouse that goes on the poodle's ear or whatever. Pete would burn the kind of the hair on the mouse. The paint will cover up some of it, but doing the wood burning, the lines still stay there, so it makes kind of the hair pattern or whatever. So we have done some wood burning on that. So
I did have a question about grits, about when you, on the wood part of it, what is your final sanding grit before you put the
well,
primer on?
the primer raises the grain so much that we just use 80 grit sandpaper. Basswood doesn't stain very well. It's all splotchy and whatever. So if I did the rocking horse and sugar pine, and that's got a nice grain, and that stains nice, but basswood isn't really not very good at all for that.
Okay.
So we use, but 80 grit, it raises the grain so much when they put the primer on, then they sand it, it gets rid of that. So we don't, it's just a waste of our time to use, anything finer, because it would just take us too long to sand.
Okay, and do you know what their sanding grit is between coats?
No, well, I think it's 120, and they also use those Scotch Brite pads, and those are different grits too, but I'm not sure what they are. Pete calls red Scotch Brite is finer, and I don't know what it is. I use it a little bit, but I don't.
Yeah, Pete said they also use riflers,
Right.
metal tools for getting into the grooves and those kind of things too. Yeah,
Right, yeah, they're pretty inexpensive. A set of them is like $10 or whatever. They're called diamond rifflers. They got diamond bits on them or whatever, but we use those quite, especially for me when I do the fine detail stuff. I don't
okay,
know.
go
You
ahead, Jack.
you ask about how we recruit carvers. I don't know that we used to go to have a booth at a fairground or whatever, and we talk to people about coming in to carve. But most of the visitors, we say, hey, if you want to try carving, you can come in and do that. We were on the radio one time way back when, but I don't know that it really, it was, I don't think we got a whole lot from that. I think it's mostly just word of mouth. We had a guy from work for, he was a videographer for George Lucas Films, found out we were doing this project, and he came up and he wanted to do a documentary on our carousel. So he spent 4 or 5 years filming the progress over those years, and then he released that on public broadcasting all over the United States. It's an hour long video. We sell the DVD at the Carousel, but we get people from all over the United States come in and say, hey, I saw your documentary on public broadcasting or whatever. So and even around town, people see that, and then they want to come in and try carving. So I just want people to enjoy coming in. You ask a question about whether I allowed talking or food or any of these things. I don't care if somebody comes in and spends 90% of his or her time talking. It gives people a purpose in life to do what we're doing. We're nonprofit, and it's a fun place to be. So it gives them a purpose in life. I don't care if we're kind of like a little, family or community. And so if that's what they enjoy doing is talking to other people, it doesn't matter to me. I don't want to be a dictator. And if you take that away from them, then it's not going to be fun for them. So they wouldn't come back. They always have something that they give to the carousel, whether it's information or just being friendly or talking to the visitors when they come in. You just need to let them be who they are. And I don't think of myself as a leader. I just think of it as somebody to be there to help them do what they need to do. I'm not, I don't have an ego. I don't care whether I would rather we all got um, credit for doing this together. I mean, that's my biggest thing. It's not, I don't want any more attention than anybody else. I think I want the carvers to get the attention rather than me. So
What
just
days and hours does the carving studio open? So that if somebody wanted to come down and spend a day or a good chunk of time, what would be the best times to come?
the 2 days that I'm there all day is Wednesday. I'm there from 9 in the morning till 9 o'clock at night, and then Saturday I'm there from 9 to 5. And then I'm there Monday and Friday mornings till like from 9 to 1 type thing. I try to be there when the carvers can come in. That's why I'm there Wednesday nights, because that's the only time they can come in. And some of those are experienced carvers or that can do some of the details. So it's important that I'm there so that they can come in and do that. I try to work with the carvers, and I tell them when I'm there, and most of them can come in when I'm physically there. There's some that come in occasionally, like on a Sunday, that's not, that's doing smaller things or whatever, but so I like to work with people and just for somebody to, enjoy coming in and learning.
Yeah. You have a floral project that seems to be your baseline testing process. Would everybody begin to carve that for you if as a way to kind of see if they can go on to something else?
Well, if somebody has said they've carved before, and I'll give them an option, I'll say, hey, do you want to do this? And we have those hobby heads that we get people started on fairly early so that they can doing heads or faces on something is pretty, the difficulty level goes from a 2 or 3 up to a 7 when you jump up there. But um, so it's so if somebody comes and says I've already carved, and I just kind of say, if they have pictures they can show me, but I just say, if you're past that, I can move you to something else. So it's not, I'm not adamant about that's what they need to start with. But if they've never carved before, they need to do that. I mean, I even have some love spoons that I kind of get people started on as a second project, and we also sell those in the gift shop, and they're pretty simple. We have boards that we make up that sit on the table so that I can teach them to not put their hand in front of holding on to the thing so that they can jam their finger. So I that's the only biggest useful thing for doing the flower type thing, is it lets them carve and not and keep them from putting their hand in front of it.
Yeah. Is it viable for a person, I'll say myself, but others that would come down, plan to spend a day
Uh-huh.
and get started and going through some process, get started on a hobby head and then take it home and finish it at home and then bring it back later?
Yep.
And you could either burn it or keep it. Is that a realistic
Yeah.
kind of a thing?
Right. Yeah. So I've had a number of people will do that. I mean, when they first come in, we don't have the tools. They don't have their own tools, but I just say, if you want to buy your own tools, you can take this home and carve on it, and then you can bring it back, every 2 or 3 weeks if you live a ways away, and then I can give you pointers, and then you can take it away again. I mean, there's different ways of working with somebody. If somebody's experienced enough, they can just kind of carve it and bring it back. Or I mean, I have a carver that used to carve at the Carousel, moved to Idaho, and he's an experienced carver. So he's got one of the dogs that goes between the horse's legs. So he has that back there. He'll occasionally send me pictures of it, and then he'll call me on the phone and we'll talk about questions that he has and stuff. So there's different ways. I mean, it kind of depends on the person, and there's different ways to deal with it. I mean, I like to get people involved, and it gets you know, then it's word of mouth. They'll say, hey, you need to go to this carousel. It's really cool, even if they live in a different state. And, it just makes, I just, carving is kind of a dying art. I'd like to kind of hope to keep it going. So,
Okay. And it seems like, well, any questions kind of floating around?
Hey, Larry, John Culver.
Yeah, John.
I'd like to interject, if anybody that's listening has not been there, I really highly encourage it. It's a great place to visit. All the different things that you pointed out in your videos and people have talked about. You can go around and learn about them. It's a wonderful place, and even downtown Albany is a nice little kind of old-fashioned downtown. So I really recommend it.
Yeah, thanks.
we have a tour guide that will take you into the paint area, the carving area, and you can talk to the carvers. There's usually not a whole lot of painters there. They come in on Monday when we're not open to the public, but the tour guide will kind of go and show you the paint area and the carving, and you can see all the antique carousel animals that are in our museum, that kind of stuff. They'll talk about it. You can the gift shop is there. You can go for rides or whatever. If you tell me you're in this or whatever, I'll even give you a ride token.
Questions? Anybody got a question?
Well, thanks very much for putting this together. This has been
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate Jack taking time. I mean, spending all that time and then spending the time to meet ahead of time and then spend the night and do some prep ahead of time. I really appreciate that. That's really great.
Yeah, and I'm there Saturdays and all day Wednesday. So if you happen to come in, then you can look me up. I'll be downstairs. So I'm happy to talk to you if you have more questions or.
Yeah. One of my takeaways out of all this is, if I'm talking to my grandkids, is study art, learn how to draw, learn how to think in 3 dimensions, study anatomy, and then if you have any time later, learn how to carve. Is that a fair summary? I mean, I kind of,
Yeah.
I relate to that myself because I missed all that background. I'm quite aware of friends of mine that are serious animal carvers, how much time they spend studying anatomy and, looking at the subtle muscles in a horse leg or the nostril flares. I remember my early carving experience, we did a monthly meeting and I go around the table, what did you do this month? He said, well, I went down to Portland State University Ornithology Laboratory and I checked out a great blue heron leg. And, he wanted to get a realistic anatomy of what that animal, it was not a leg, it was an actual bird, but they have taxidermy kind of things. That's a level of detail that it kind of like, I'll never get there in my life. But then again, maybe I will. But it's quite amazing. So Jack, thank you. Thank you for your team, for the efforts you're putting in personally and collectively, because I think it really makes a difference. I've characterized the Albany Carousel as the biggest carving project in Oregon history. And I think it's one of the finest in the United States. And I can say that because I've been to all 3 carousels in the United States. I'm sorry. I don't have a good context, but I've been in a few carousels, and this, and also credit to the Salem group as well, who've got an amazing amount of work that has been put out now. Okay, next month we have a monthly program, God willing, that Betty Semnett will be talking about everything she knows about cottonwood bark carving. She's a quite interesting carver and wood turner. And she's dealing with some health issues, so I'm hoping that it'll all work out. We'll find out Wednesday for sure. And November program is a program with Cherry Cox, who carves what I would call deep relief pierced carvings. And they're really quite spectacular. They are held together by two little pieces of wood. And you look at those and you say, there's no way you could carve that without breaking them off. So she describes how she actually does that by building some scaffolding and infrastructure to make it possible to do. And some of them she backs with stained glass or mirrors in order not to provide strength, but to provide some color and texture. That's quite an interesting combination. Okay, for everybody out of town, out of state, thank you very much. We'll see you maybe next month, but thanks again. Thank you, Jack. Appreciate it very
Yeah,
much.
thank you.
Okay, good night.
Right.
Thanks, Larry. Thanks, Jack.
Yep,
Okay.
thank you.
See ya.
Good to see you.
Yeah.